Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nick Haslam. I am your host for this evening, or this afternoon, my time. Today, we're going to get into what I'm going to call Cataclysm of the Mind. Now, that's not the phrase that Ben Davidson's using. This is the science of cataclysm. Coronal mass ejections, magnetic pole flips, grand solar minimum. I haven't watched his documentary. I did read some of the comments, and it sounded like it was a bit of an infomercial. But this is the science of it. And again, if you haven't watched other episodes, been studying this for a while, I feel like I've dived into it good enough to be able to share this with you. Been 8 years for speaking out. Lines up with star law, lines up with natural law, indigenous wisdom traditions, oral law. But because of the nature of this subject, I have to preface it. The preface is, no, I'm not some doomsdayer. No, I don't have some mental disease. No, I am not the problem. No, this is not the world is ending. And this is not some fear-based thing. This is not me buying into the death cult. This is you have cognitive dissonance and you don't want to accept the available information, and you have not done the required research to come at a holistic comprehension of cataclysm. So if you just want the true science, if you just want the hard science, because I'm just some long-haired, dude with a turquoise necklace on, have at it. Argue on the science, because I've gone through it, and I believe it to be true, and it's not about belief, but I have done extraordinary amounts of research in here. Now, keep the personality out of it. Don't believe me. Do your own research. Ben Davidson, yes, he's a bit of a douche, but he's got an innate ability to process scientific papers and multidisciplinary and an integrative approach to this. And why am I talking about cataclysm of the mind? Because in a way, maybe our minds do need to go through a cataclysm of, and maybe it's not the right terminology, but it is the right terminology. It's just like, I guess the Tower card in the tarot comes up a little bit. It's kind of like letting go of what we think to be true, and maybe our minds do need to go through its own version of a cataclysm to be able to process and transform this information and energy. Because and the reason, just to be very honest with you, the reason why I'm doing another episode on this is because I feel like this is probably what gets the worst reaction. I can sense that, and the world's ending. Ooh, yeah, it's not what I'm saying. So I don't know. If you don't get it, you don't get it. So here's the science of it, and let's crack open a beer. And this is what we're drinking today. And let's learn. Because how fun is learning, guys? Cosmic surfing learning. And if you know anything about ancient science as well, you'll know that cataclysm is a big part of it. So, can see that all through Egypt, and can see it through the geology of the sites. All of these ancient civilizations talk about evolution and devolution, and cataclysm is a part of it, and the spiritual nature of it in terms of ability to process that information and to, preserve wisdom and come out the other side of it. So this is why I'm sharing his story, because this is the story that has been handed down for generations. So thank you to our ancestors. And this is coming to you live from Caterpillar Dreaming, where the sun first hits the earth and the song lines begin. And I'm singing up moral law and natural law. So without any more shit talking, let us get on with it. And this is Ben Davidson with the Disaster Cycle. And it's good to be here, everyone. Thanks for coming along. I'm doing this to build all of the information in a repository, in a library, so you can follow along. And also, when I do say something, I can be like, go back and watch an episode. And thank you to Space for the News. I know that we're watching large amounts of other people's content, and just to be very clear, the intention here is to promote other people's work, great journalists, true information, and to point people in the right direction with really solid information. And just been a little bit of a conduit for good sources of knowledge and wisdom.
I think it's important to know about the Earth turning over and the micronova, and how the government has hidden this, and how billionaires are preparing. And this is exactly what religions have told us is going to happen to our culture. It's going to happen.
Oh, that's while you mentioned religion, that was the one other thing I wanted to mention is completely distancing myself from anything to do with religion or cult-like behavior or anything of that nature. Yes, religion does talk about it, but they have got their stories from oral wisdom traditions. So while there might be some kind of agenda to wrap this all up in some kind of religious mindset or some bullshit like that, not into religion whatsoever. So let's leave that out of it, please. Thank you.
To the sky, going to happen to the sun. Revelation 16:8. And the fourth angel poured out his vial upon the sun, and the power was given unto him to scorch men with fire. A third of the stars disappearing from the sky. They knew the difference between stars and meteors. A third of the stars coming down is not meteors. That's the Earth going like this, and part of the sky you could see before, no longer visible. The Earth swaying to and fro like a drunkard. You put all these things together, and you have to wonder, wait a minute, not only does the math say this is how it plays out, the physics and the chemistry says this is how it plays out. This is what we're watching. Oh, and they knew this a couple thousand years ago and put it in a book.
The disaster cycle, scientific discussion. Recently, many of you saw the Disaster Cycle documentary, which was more made for the layman. This is the high-level scientific discussion, and within it are the facts derived from the connections between over 1,000 peer-reviewed citations. Now, we're not going to show you all of those papers and all of the citations for all of the affirmative facts stated herein. That would take 4 to 5 days. We have been meticulously going over them day by day in the morning news, which has come out 365 days a year since 2011, in our various summary videos, our various publications, and most notably our most recent book, where all of the citations are put together in one place. This video will just be the affirmative facts. You can hunt down those citations yourself. But let's get started with the sun. Because to begin, we have to start thinking about the sun in a different way than most people think about the sun. Most people think about the sun in terms of light. The visible light, it lights up the world, day versus night. And when they go beyond the visible light, they're thinking about ultraviolet light, photosynthesis, skin burns, suntan, melatonin production. This is very real. This is very important, but it is not the entire picture, because you get a little bit beyond the visible and ultraviolet wavelengths to the X-ray light. This is very important and highly variable from the sun. And there's not just light energy coming from the sun, but particle energy as well, protons, electrons, ions. While the sun is absolutely putting out light in every single direction all the time, it is also putting out particles, a particle emission called the solar wind. It is made of protons, charged hydrogen, electrons, charged helium, all of these subatomic or ionic tiny little bits of particulate matter, most of them energized as well. And this is streaming out in all directions, just like the light from the sun. Now, what's interesting is while the light that we normally think of leaving the sun is relatively constant, the particle emission from the sun is not. For example, let's go about down to maybe Earth size here at the surface of the sun, and we see these black dots. These are called sunspots, and what they are essentially are highly magnetic areas. Now, what's interesting is that the surface and the atmosphere of the sun, it's all those charged particles that are highly reactive to magnetism. So when these sunspots appear and they like to grow and move around quite a bit, what is that magnetism doing? Well, we have ways to look at that as well on ultraviolet light. These arcs connect sunspot to sunspot, and when they move around those sunspots, sometimes these arcs can collide. And given that these arcs, powerful magnetism, we're talking about these sunspots that are the size of the Earth. Imagine how powerful these magnetic arcs actually are. They are surging electromagnetic plasma to near relativistic speeds already, and then they crash into one another and we get a solar flare. Solar flares are planet-sized explosions of X-rays. This happens when that activity at the sunspot becomes too chaotic. There's one of those collisions, a destabilization, and an explosion of the stored magnetic energy, again in the form of X-rays. This, as you can probably see here, tends to push out other charged particles, that plasma in the sun's atmosphere, which adds to the particle emission of the solar wind and can be a faster, more dense shock wave that heads out into space. The other way that we can get one of these coronal mass ejections, or CMEs, is from a filament eruption. A filament is a thin rope, kind of like a odd-shaped cloud of plasma on the sun. And just as a sunspot can explode and send that plasma out into space, sometimes that cloud can lose its grip magnetically on the sun's atmosphere and just rip away out into space even without a solar flare. These are the two main ways that we get an explosive particle enhancement. But there's also a more subtle particle enhancement from these. This dark thing is called a coronal hole. And while most of the sun has these arches, these magnetic arches, which also help contain a lot of the material there are areas on the sun like this where the magnetic fields are open into space. This allows the solar wind to spew out much more strongly. Basically, rather than an explosion and a shock wave being added to the solar wind, it's almost like you slowly depress the gas pedal a little more and the vehicle starts accelerating. That's how you would better think of a coronal hole stream. And so we have these ways, now that we are thinking about the sun beyond light, and we are thinking about other kinds of particles that come into the atmosphere, say from cosmic rays, we need to start understanding that while the sun is the giver of life with this ultraviolet light, we have this solar wind that is just as prevalent, and it is far more variable. We have coronal mass ejections that can come from solar flares or filament eruptions, and we can have coronal hole streams which amplify or create more energetic particle streams within the solar wind. This is very important to remember for several reasons. Not only are those particle events the ones that are scary in terms of solar flares or the solar EMP, if you've heard of this, but they're important climatologically. You see, the ultraviolet light and visible light, they barely change ever. We're talking about a 0.1% shift over several years' time. But the X-ray light can vary by 10 to 10,000 times over very short periods. The far ultraviolet light, so ultraviolet light is here, but there's also a near and a far spectrum to it. The far ultraviolet light, that can vary by 15% over the same amount of time that overall ultraviolet light only varies 0.1%. Those particles in the solar wind, over very short amounts of time, they can have a 10 to 1000x increase or change, especially during those coronal mass ejection impacts when they are arriving at Earth. The cosmic rays from the galaxy, 5 to 15% change, and during one of these actual impacts from the sun, there can be a 3 to 10% change in a day. This is left out of climate models. This is what is starting to scare the technological world about the sun. Most importantly, right now, what you need to have in your head is, yes, there is this light energy from the sun, but equally important, solar particle energy.
I'm Mark Moldwin, a professor of climate and space science and engineering here at the University of Michigan. One of the areas that I specialize in is space weather, and that's how...
Bone to pick. This is an unanswered question on Solari with Catherine Austin-Fitz and Joseph Farrell. And it's an unanswered question when it shouldn't be, because even people like Joseph Farrell, who've got a huge amount of respect for, is still trying to say things like, this is like caught up in some kind of like environmental kind of like the like the same people that did like the earth is heating up kind of a thing. Actually, this is the antithesis or anti all of that establishment science, and there's been a lot of pushback, and there's been a lot of cover-ups and all that over time of this information, and this is knowable, and I don't believe that it's part of, like, if it's an unanswered ongoing question, like, why not do more research into it and figure it out rather than just labeling it as like a potential kind of woke green cover up disclosure kind of crap. Anyway, so yeah, it's important to get the proper information.
The sun influences the Earth's environment, and particularly technology. And the most famous geomagnetic storm happened in September of 1859, when a scientist, Richard Carrington, was taking a sketch of the sun. And while he was sketching the sunspot of the sun, he saw a visible flash. About a day later, he noticed that the compass needle, the magnetometer, wiggled. He wrote a letter to the Royal Transactions saying, "Dear sirs, on this date I observed this flare, and then the geomagnetic disturbance. Did anybody else observe it?" And people around the world said that they did. And they observed aurora in Cuba, right? I mean, so this was a lot of energy dumped into the system. He suggested that whatever happened on the sun caused the magnetic field to wiggle. And so that was the first suggestion of this connection, that storms on the sun can cause storms on Earth. The Carrington event back in 1859 was pre all types of technology. Communication was through telegraph wires, and there were fires that broke out at railway stations at the telegraph. And coronal mass ejections are huge explosions of the outer atmosphere of the sun. And so you can imagine an aircraft carrier, and now think about 500,000 aircraft carriers. So that's a mass of a coronal mass ejection. It can be thrown off the sun at a few million miles an hour. And so it can take a day or so to go from the sun to the Earth, but it has a huge amounts of energy, just momentum, and it hits the Earth's protective shield, and it causes it to ring like a bell. A big coronal mass ejection Carrington event storm could knock out Europe or North America's power grid.
Only about 10 years ago, we realized why all of a sudden the telegraph lines ignited on planet Earth 19 hours later, because that's how long it took for the energy to get from the sun to the Earth to induct into the telegraph lines to light them up on fire, shock operators, cause fires in the cities and cause fires in the brushlands. That was from a small solar flare, really, a small one comparatively. But the deal is, if that same one happened now, we have a lot more than telegraph lines. We'd lose all our satellites in space. We'd lose a lot of the communication stuff on Earth. We'd lose a lot of we'd completely be gone with GPS. That'd be gone.
So in a previous episode, I mentioned that I got a VIP ticket to 2008 Observing the Frontier, and he was speaking. The reason, just to clarify, I got a VIP ticket not to be a dick and so I'm VIP or whatever. I got the VIP ticket because I wanted to go there in person and energetically tune in, bro, and see if these guys are full of shit or if I could pick up any kind of disturbance in the field. And I know that's kind of not how most people operate, but I'm more in the shamanic way of doing things. So yeah, I went and did that, and I had the pleasure of hanging out with this guy. Loves his cannabis, and I think there's it. Yeah, and then so this is one of the people that Ben Davidson holds in high regard. He's always mentioned him, and as part of his thing, and very, very knowledgeable guy.
We're gonna have lots of transformer fires, all that kind of stuff, and blackouts. Maybe years to fix all the blackouts for something that massive.
So you just watched a little bit from.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I I know it's kind of it's just a random story, but yeah, smoking a joint with that guy was cool. It's just not a thing that you can say every day. Smoked a joint with one of the best physicists in the world.
The documentary there, sort of implying one of the reasons why we care about this particle energy, and that would be the technology. It is a matter of fact that the most well-known risk of these big solar events, major space weather, we call it, would be on technology. But there is a far greater expanse to why we care about the particle emission from the sun, beyond just the light. And yes, the first is technological. A big enough solar flare will send us right back to the Stone Age, and with Earth's magnetic field weakening, basically the premise of this entire presentation, it's going to take less and less extreme of a blast from the sun to do the same level of damage.
Pay attention here, because people think, they start just talking about the coronal mass ejection and trying to make it sound like the chances of that are very low. But the point here is that with the weakening magnetic field of the Earth, things that have had would have less of an effect now all of a sudden can create big results
here on Earth. In fact, that's one of the things that we've been witnessing over the last couple of years. But most people are not too challenged by the concept of an electromagnetic explosion and shock wave that hits Earth can cause an electromagnetic pulse and damage electronics here on the planet. That's relatively easy to understand. Where you have to start bringing in other things that are already in your brain is when we start talking about the impact of this energy on water and water vapor, on iron and conductive material, and on piezoelectric crystals. Now, this first one and the second one too probably aren't that difficult for you. Iron, electromagnetism. When we're talking about water, maybe you've got some kind of basic idea. I mean, you understand that you don't want to be swimming in a pool during a thunderstorm any more than you want to be holding a golf club over your head. But what are the actual implications of the fact that this electromagnetic energy can be impacting water, iron, other metals, other conductive materials here on the Earth, and piezoelectric crystals, including olivine, the number one constituent of the crust? Let's start with the weather, because this is where a lot is ignored. By losing solar particle forcing from the climate discussion, You lose all of the key integral short-term particle forcing pathways for how the sun is actually able to impact the weather. In this book, in our previous book, in the previous books to them, we have gone over the hundreds and hundreds of papers showing how there are very strong correlations between solar activity and Earth's temperature, but also precipitation, the winds, the jet streams, lightning, storm cells, atmospheric pressure cells, clouds, the major oscillations and modes of the planet, and the global electric circuit. Now, this is where we could probably take an entire day just going over the hundreds of statistical findings. And most of the statistical findings of these are beginning to be more and more towards that particle forcing data from the sun rather than the light energy or irradiance data from the sun. But what's more important is understanding how this actually works. A lot of it, in terms of long periods of time, has to do with the fact that the oceans can easily take in, trap, store, and then re-release energy. They are fantastic modulators of extremity in the climate. What you are seeing right here is known as the Walker circulation. The Walker circulation is a critical flow of where moisture is evaporating versus where it's tending to come back down. A lot of this is depending on El Nino versus La Nina. A lot of it impacts further things like the North Atlantic Oscillation or the Southern Annular Mode. And these key foundational heat injection and heat storage processes of the planet are directly impacted by both sunlight and solar particles. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because as these solar wind particles are coming to Earth, light just goes wherever it's pointed. That's not what happens to the particles. When these solar wind particles are impacting Earth, Earth has a magnetic field that likes to deflect them. It also gets compressed while it is deflecting them. And while it is compressing, it actually compresses some of the Van Allen belt electrons down into the atmosphere. So even though the solar particles hit Earth's magnetic field and don't pass, they do transfer the energy somewhat into Earth's atmosphere. Now, while they're being deflected north and south and all around the Earth, up at the north and the south poles of the magnetic field, there are holes called the polar cusps. This is where the particle energy freely bypasses Earth's magnetic shield, comes down into Earth's atmosphere, and triggers the auroras. And so while we have this energy that is coming in, and it is compressing Earth's magnetic field and shooting that charged energy down into the tropics, per se, we also have this excitation of the uppermost layer there, and it is causing a push of this energy downward towards the equator to meet the energy that is already being introduced there from the compression of this electromagnetic shock wave impacting the Earth. In general, all of these things are juicing up the top of the sky, called the ionosphere. It is basically another layer of atmosphere on top of the air, except most of it isn't neutral gas that you can breathe. It is charged particles. And that happens to be the ceiling of what we call the global electric circuit. There is a constant flow of electric current up and down from that top of the sky ionosphere down to the ground. It is like one big circuit. And so when we get this injection of energy from the sun into that layer, it is injecting it into the circuit that goes throughout the entire atmosphere. And so when we have this, it is not so difficult to understand exactly how the sun can impact the weather. All of this energy gets dumped into this electric current system up and down through the atmosphere. And that electric current can impact the water vapor in the atmosphere. Obviously, that's going to impact clouds and precipitation, but as it moves them around, it determines where is sunny and where it's not. that impacts temperatures. Obviously, those things are going to impact winds and storms. Once you start to see how this particle energy is actually injected into the planet, all of a sudden, all these correlations begin to make sense. And then when you can actually watch this and you can see how electric current actually moves water around, now we're talking. Because now you're saying, okay, I'm actually watching this with my eyes. But then you have to say to yourself, okay, they showed the statistics. Now I can understand how it works in the atmosphere. There's water other places too, like our bodies. But do you know what else is in our bodies? Pretty much everything that happens inside of our body is mediated by electrolytes flowing through ion channels.
As above, so
Our
below.
mitochondria are electromagnetic energy factories inside every cell that we have. Probably not beyond most of your understanding that our nervous system is almost entirely electrical, but a lot of people don't know that the electric power of the cardiac system is larger than that of the nervous system. This is why, just as we're not going to go through, and by the way, in both of these books, there's an entire chapter on the health effects. Again, we're talking hundreds and hundreds of studies on the impact of these solar storms on cardiac, psychological, autoimmune, emotional, the list goes on. And over long term, even things like DNA damage, cancer rates, and in terms of the psychology, it extends out not only to things like emotional problems or psychological diagnoses, but crime rates, terrorism rates, wars, revolutions, rises of populism, things like that. All of these can be tied back to these major solar cycles. And all of these things are either direct physiological or large-scale behavioral of the human population. And they work for the same reason that our technology and our weather is susceptible to this electromagnetic solar energy. Just think about it at the most extreme levels. A lightning strike can stop your heart. And with a manufactured lightning strike, they can restart it. Electroshock therapy impacting how people think and how they behave. A lot of those things aren't fantastic science, but the premise of the effect can happen once this energy is introduced. Who will deny this? Let's think about all that water motion. You know what? Let's watch that water motion again, because it's really important for the earthquake and the volcanic connection. You know, we have all of this energy that is dumped in, and we have the flow through the atmosphere, but the floor of that circuit is the crust. And many of you know there is more water locked beneath our feet than in all of the oceans up here on the surface. What happens when these currents, not only from the global electric circuit, but the geomagnetically induced currents from the solar storms themselves, hit this water, hit these metals, or here, hit the olivine crystals? What you're seeing here is we low, no discharge, no glow mode, juiced up these piezoelectric crystals, and then we introduced a grounding rod. Upon discharge of the energy, they self-translocate. They just move on their own when they discharge their energy. All this underneath the ground while the iron and the water are reacting as well. This is why there are also hundreds of papers on the solar earthquake connection, and there are starting to be more on the solar volcanic connection as well. None of this should be shocking. If you just take it as, hey, the sun can send us back to the Stone Age. The sun can stop your heart. The sun can cause you and your spouse to have a fight today. The sun can cause this earthquake. The sun could make that storm worse. It sounds crazy until you realize these are electromagnetic injections of energy into systems that are built on metal, on water, on electromagnetically reactive stuff. And all of a sudden, it doesn't sound so crazy anymore.
In the recent decades, the position of the magnetic poles has been moving very rapidly. It's been moving across northern Canada towards Russia, back again. That means the areas where you're going to have more or less problems with the satellites also shift. I'm Mark Barassa. I'm a professor of meteorology at Florida State University and the associate director of the Center for Ocean Atmospheric Prediction Studies. I lead a NASA science team for investigating surface winds. We measure winds over the ocean. So there's different categories of solar flares. They're organized by order of magnitude, so a factor of 10 difference in strength. But as they go up in this letter, they become 10 times as bad. And when you get up to these more severe cases, they are not just a little bit more severe than the lower ones. They are a lot more severe. So it's been hypothesized that we're due for a change, a swap of the magnetic polarity of the Earth, where south and north would swap signs. And during that process, it's been suggested that the electromagnetic field around Earth could weaken. It would be more like Mars, which doesn't have a protective electromagnetic field. In terms of electronics on the Earth, if we got one of those blasts, it will cause an enormous electric surge in the power lines, those that are still metallic. So if we have fiber optic cable, not a problem. If we have the actual power lines, though, which are more metal, then you're going to get them destroyed. We will have them glow, we will have fires, we will have melting of things. Our power grid is the same power grid we've had decades ago.
We did a little bit of why we care when it comes to solar particle energy, because it does all of these things here on Earth: technology, weather, seismicity, our bodies, our brains. We also care because in what Earth is experiencing right now, a geomagnetic excursion, a cyclical shift of Earth's magnetic poles, the magnetic field of Earth weakens. Now, this has a very minute impact on the amount of light that comes in, but it has a dramatic impact on how many particles come in. A good way to think of it is you take two sides of a magnet, all right, that are supposed to repel each other. You know, you try to put them and they want to push apart, all right? That's the force that is protecting Earth from all of this scary charged particle energy out in space. Shine a flashlight at that magnet. See how much of the light that magnetic field stops. Basically none. Basically none. But the magnetic fields and the particles, if you're trying to throw, a particle that would be repelled through there, it's never getting through. Except if you weaken the magnet, then they're going to start to get through. And so these correlations with the technology, with our bodies, with the weather, with earthquakes, with the way that the world even rotates, all these connections are not only real, and they should make sense to you now, since you know how that energy gets in and what it does to the things that are here, the water, the metal, etc. All of that is getting amplified because the shield, the only thing standing in the way of us and those particles, is weakening, letting more and more of them in. Now, what you're looking at right here, this is a pretty rough but relatively accurate list of those geomagnetic excursions, the rapid pole shifts. Now, there is some wonkiness to this because a lot of it depends on isotope dating, which is largely a disaster. For example, in green, we have the Lake Mungo excursion 24,000 years ago. If you go into the peer-reviewed literature, you'll get everything from 21 to 36,000 years ago. For Mono Lake, which was at 36,000 years ago, you'll get everything from 26 to 40,000 years ago. There are 2 Lechamp events on this list. For a long time, and to this day, many geologists think it was just one. You go and you look at any of the data chips, there's clearly a big drop, and then there's another drop about 6,000 years later. This is happening approximately every 6,000 years. And one of the weirdest things is it is generally understood that it's harder to spot these the further in time you go back. And yet, the last one to officially be recognized is the one 6,000 years ago, the most recent one, the one that should be easiest to see. There is a paleo intensity drop that is visible in all of the magnetic field data. For years, we were calling this the NOAA event. There was a very strong confirmation that came out about a year and a half ago out of the Tianqi region in China. So I started calling it the Tianqi region. Since then, I have found geologists not doing the same. So maybe we're back to calling the event 6,000 years ago the NOAA event. But what we call it doesn't really matter. And whether it's 6,000 or 6,100 versus 5,721 years is also not important, because whatever that actual number is, it's very repeatable in the data. There's that exact distance in time between these layers of disaster. We're that exact distance from the last one in terms of the sediment. When we look in time, yep, 6,000 years, we're perfectly due in time. What are we seeing right now? We'll go into this a little more, but Earth's magnetic poles are moving, and Earth's magnetic field, that shield blocking all of the particle energy, is weakening once again, right on time. Maybe it's just a coincidence. Maybe it doesn't matter. Or maybe it really, really matters. I'm going to toss this up here. And if you guys want to screenshot, take a picture, whatever, these are the main recent articles that are describing whether or not it is an extinction level event to have a magnetic pole shift, a geomagnetic excursion. It's a clean sweep. It's a clean sweep. If you go back 20 years, 30 years, there was some discussion back and forth and some disagreement. It's a clean sweep now. Everybody recognizes that this is a complete disaster. And the reason is this, basically, the change in Earth's magnetic field. Now, on the left side, you can see what Earth's magnetic field looks like when it's strong, and that yellowish, greenish, lightish color there. That's the protection that we are getting from the sun, which you have to envision is off the screen to the left. But over on the right side of this image, you can see we don't have that brighter yellowish green. In fact, everything's all wonky. It's not clean. And in fact, look where the actual white lines connect to the central Earth, not up at the poles, but at the equator, a 90-degree shift and a weakening of the Earth's magnetic field. Now, the reason why most of these papers say that this is an extinction level event is because of ozone. Now, this is absolutely a big thing, but it's not the whole story. Here's what's going on. The ozone layer above our head, what does it do? It protects us from the most dangerous form of ultraviolet light. Yes, ultraviolet light is needed for photosynthesis, for our skin, vitamin D production, for a lot of things here on the planet. But that scary range of it would basically kill everything on the planet if it was allowed to fully come through. Now, here's where the ozone comes in. The ozone that is up there protecting us from that dangerous UV radiation is not the same ozone that was up there a year ago, and it won't be the same ozone that's up there a year from now. The ozone layer is in a constant state of creation and destruction. It's a balance. Sunlight, light energy, creates the photoionization and photochemical processes that create ozone, but those solar particles hit and destroy ozone. Normally, this is in a pretty good balance. However, as Earth's magnetic field is weakening, remember, it doesn't let in all that more light, but it lets in a lot more of the particles. Those destroy the ozone. We get this surge of those particles as Earth's magnetic field weakens, and we have a general loss of the ozone. It does not disappear completely, but it gets depleted enough that that scary ultraviolet range is now a problem. And so let's just take a look at this right here. Particles destroy the ozone. This increases the ultraviolet light that is able to penetrate. That ultraviolet light is also able to act on clouds, on surface temperatures, on the oceans. And so as these particles destroy the ozone, we have a twofer, a biological and a climatological punch to the world. But what else is happening? Because those particles that are coming through, what did we just talk about in the green slides? Those particles themselves are already a climatological, meteorological, and a biological, a health issue. So as these particles destroy the ozone, the particles themselves are already a weather and a health problem. But when they destroy the ozone, there's a secondary weather and a secondary health problem. We've got 4 big problems on a planet where most humans forget it's not that easy to live and survive on this planet. Life is hard. You throw 4 curveballs, 2 climatological, 2 biological at the world, you're going to have major die-offs. That's why all of these papers are now in agreement, clean sweep, flawless victory. And while there is this double dose of a climatological and a double dose of a biological assault, the animals aren't going to know where they're going. Everybody knows birds use the magnetic field for migration, but it goes so far beyond that. Mammals, about 1,000 different marine creatures, insects, plants, they use this not only for migration, but other kinds of navigation, to foraging grounds, to reproductive zones. Some mammals, when fleeing a predator, preferentially do so along geomagnetic field lines. A navigational hiccup during a double dose of climatological and a double dose of biological assault from the Earth and the Sun is why all of those papers, now, as we have a better understanding of the way our planet works, why they all say, yeah, this is a very, very big deal. It's a huge thing. We also have information that these things are, in fact, all tied together in the way that they appear to be. In fact, we just went over that there is this 6,000, and I will be making a case for a fuller harmonic up to a 12,000-year cycle in terms of Earth's magnetism. But at its base, there is at least a 6,000-year cycle. There is evidence possibly for shorter ones as well. There is a 6,000-year hydroclimate event or Heinrich event cycle. Also, shorter versions of that as well, known as Dansgaard-Oeschger events, or the Holocene version, a bond event. That teal-colored link right below the middle line there, that is the paper on the solar Heinrich bond cycle, which does, of course, also match the 6,000-year geomagnetic cycle. And just for good measure, right afterwards, the world's top scientists, and this has been confirmed several times at the black link down there below the last line, we are on the same 6,000-year cycle, largest super flares. Again, maybe this is all just a coincidence. Now, here's something interesting. This was from a paper recently. Now, in addition to there being all of this isotope confusion about when did this event happen versus this event, and maybe this event was actually this event, basically what we can see is when you look at individual stacks, it's a repeating thing. We have a similar confusion for when the modern event actually began. If we look at this chart right here, it would seem to suggest that the modern magnetic pole shift actually began about 300 or 400 years ago, and we've lost about 55% of the field. But that really is coming up. Coming down off of the peak that you see there. And it's much more well understood that the major shift, the major beginning to the movement of Earth's magnetic field and to the loss of Earth's magnetic field was 1859. Every year, it was going to shift a little bit this way, a little bit this way, a little bit this way. By the year 2000, this shift had gotten to the point where the magnetic poles, the North Pole anyway, was moving at 20 kilometers a year. And we had lost 10% of Earth's magnetic field in only about 150 years. Then 2006 happens. There's a major acceleration. We go from 5% loss per century to 5% per decade, and we start seeing the magnetic pole racing at about 40 kilometers a year. Jump to 2010. We're now down to 15% total field loss according to the ESA Swarm mission. And the mission manager for Swarm came out and said, we've gone from losing 5% per century to 5% every decade. We're losing Earth's magnetic field 10 times faster now. Earth's magnetic poles are getting ready to flip. We lost 10% in 150 years and another 5% in only a decade, meaning that to lose that same 10% would take 20 years, which took 150 years before. We've seen more moderate accelerations via 2 geomagnetic jerks from 2015 to 2018. And then in 2019, all while the experts were telling us that the magnetic poles were going to keep they're going to slow down. They're not going to keep doing this. We're not going to have a pole shift. Every world magnetic model, which comes out on the years ending in 5 and 0, they all say it's going to stop, it's going to stop. But in 2019, it had sped up and was moving so fast, they had to deliver the first ever out-of-cycle update. Not on a year ending in a 5 or a 0. They had to do this in 2019 because they couldn't wait that extra year. GPS, military, major commercial stuff, airlines, it was going to start affecting everything. They had to re-release the world magnetic model a year early because of how fast Earth's magnetic field was changing. Then things got much worse because what we have here are 2 of the most important papers. And I am going to show you these because these are the critical recent updates. We're going to start at 2022. There was a major acceleration leading into a 2023 major magnetic anomaly. That's what the paper on the left is about by Dr. Sergei Simonenko. He's the one who identified that there was this major anomaly that occurred at some point in early 2023, and it had really set the clock going, and Earth's magnetic field had begun to go even faster. This is when the auroral events began. Those who have been here at the channel for a while, you know it was March or April of 2023 that we started saying, hey guys, look, what the sun is throwing off, the solar wind that is impacting Earth. Neither of these things can account for how bananas these auroras are. None of these things can account for the high KP index. None of these things can account for the fact that we're seeing low latitude auroras over and over again, which is not only abnormal, but the fact that what the sun is throwing at us is slightly less than what it used to take to see these low latitude auroras. There's something very strange going on. They're happening more often from less instigation. It's kind of like, imagine if over time, those of you who like to have a couple of beers and watch football, imagine if over time you were expecting to drink less and less beer and feel more and more happy by the end of the night. That's not how this should work, right? But that's what's happening with Earth's auroras. Earth's taking in less and less, but it's getting tipsier and tipsier by the end of the night. Well, what's happening? The interface, in this case, the individual's tolerance is for some reason hitting the floor. Earth's tolerance magnetically for the electromagnetic energy from space is hitting the floor. Then we got a geomagnetic jerk in 2024. And in 2025, we have early model degradation. Last time that they had to do the out-of-cycle update to the magnetic field, the model was released in 2015. They were going to release another one in 2020. They had to do it 1 year early. They released the 2025 model. By May of 2025, there was major degradation. 6 months after the release, which was technically in December of 2024. So it was 6 months up to May of 2025. 6 months and we're seeing major degradation. The auroral and atmospheric anomalies are continuing, especially the polar summer mesospheric echo enhancement, which has nothing to do with CO2. The North Atlantic cold blob and its connection with the AMOC. The ocean shutdown process confirmed. The geodesy anomalies, specifically with the Chandler wobble, something that's not supposed to be this variable, it disappeared for a little bit. A critical function of Earth's rotational and physical dynamics and characteristics just disappeared for a time. And here we are in early 2026. The auroral events are already continuing. We're not even We weren't even 3 full weeks into January before the first major southward auroral event happened. They were visible in Florida again. And we're seeing even more geodesy anomalies with the polar wander. There's a couple of folks on X who are tracking this, and nothing looks right on the planet right now. Our planet's unrecognizable. Geodesically, aurorally, atmospherically, electromagnetically, ionospherically. And then you look at the people living here. All that stuff for 2025, that's in the paper to the right, by the way. Basically, what took 4 years for the first out-of-cycle release, and which was dramatic, that should never happen. They should never have to release the world magnetic model out of cycle. We're basically there, except it didn't take 4 years this time. It took about 6 months. When you break this out, when you realize that we've lost 5% of Earth's magnetic field per century, then we accelerated to 5% per decade, how we have...
Oh, but you're just a doomsdayer. Oh, the world's ending, is it? Oh, you must be mentally ill.
Continued accelerating, even though they have not given us new marks on how much we have lost. Basically, what this does is this extrapolates the curve out. I don't think that the green or the red are likely. I think the yellow is quite likely. But essentially, when you extrapolate the curve out, you have to do some guessing for, okay, when's the next acceleration? Is it going to be a moderate acceleration, a major acceleration? When's the big acceleration take us over the edge? Those are questions that no human could actually answer. But with simple mathematics, we know that the green and red lines create the boundaries of what is possible. So the yellow line, sometime in the 2040s, appears to be when we should be expecting to have this magnetic pole shift. And so what is important for you to remember right now, this cycle exists. We are due for it right now. It has begun. It is accelerating. And it is an extinction level event. Now, here's where things get a little interesting. The story could stop right there. We could just say, hey, look, the data is very, very clear. This seems to happen really quite often in geologic history. The timing suggests we're due right now. We are seeing it right now. It is getting faster and faster. All the world's top scientists say this is a major extinction level event, especially because think about all those things. You've got the double dose of climatological, the double dose of biological, while the animals can't navigate. And all at the same time, humans are going to lose the electric grid because we're losing all of that. And so while the animal kingdom is basically falling apart.
And if you've been following, this is why we need 0 point energy right now, because other people have it. And if we are going to keep acting like we are in this slavery system, then how are people going to reboot? How is the human record going to be stored and recorded and backed up so we can propagate on the other side of it? How are we going to propagate and reconnect? Well, through media and 0 point energy.
Apart all around us. Many of you have probably heard about this ladder of the food chain, and you just knock out one little rung of the ladder and the whole ladder collapses. We've got plants, insects. I didn't even touch on the microbes and things like plankton that are directly impacted by this. We're talking about up and down and all side to side of the food chain collapsing at the exact same time. And all of this while Earth's technological systems are no longer valid for humans. We don't have power. Turn on the faucet, nothing comes out. And if it did, you wouldn't want to drink it because there's no power at the sanitation station anyway. Who knows what's coming through that pipe? There's nothing at the store. There's nothing at the bank. There's nothing at the gas station. Just you and 7 billion other hungry people. We could end the story right there. And I would hopefully imagine a considerable enough amount of concern that you think that this matters. But it actually matters a lot more than that, because it's not just the Earth. There is evidence that this magnetic shift happening to our planet is happening throughout the entire solar system. We have some areas where we have direct evidence and some are indirect evidence. And this is where it is important that you have paid attention at the beginning, understanding why we care about particle energy. Because if you understand how this solar particle energy, which is directly impacted by a planet's magnetic state, strong, weak, then you're going to be able to recognize what's happening here. So let's start with the direct evidence on the sun. We have direct evidence of the sun's magnetic fields changing, the coronal magnetic fields. The corona is what they call the atmosphere of the sun. While those fields are changing in ways that they're not supposed to change, the helium abundance in the solar atmosphere is changing, and it is tied directly to those changes of the magnetic field. So we have a direct evidence here of a shifting magnetic state of the sun while there is a shifting atmospheric state on the sun. On Jupiter, there's tons of atmospheric anomalies, cloud bands appearing or disappearing. The Great Red Spot was dying. Red Junior was born. They've discovered new jet streams forming in Jupiter. But most importantly, the radio emission of Jupiter's magnetic field is changing. What do I mean by that? You see, electrons caught in the super powerful magnetic field of Jupiter are accelerated so fast that they actually sing in radio waves. And these have always been very constant, going back to Nelson's studies back in the teens and the 20s. They were able to detect these radio signals from Jupiter, and they were very constant until 2012 when they started changing. Now, one of two things could have happened. Either the nature of an electron changed at Jupiter and nowhere else. We know it didn't change here. Or perhaps a fundamental subatomic physics particle did not change. What changed was its accelerator. The magnetic field began to change, causing it to sing a different song. We also saw an interesting bit of evidence from Jupiter. It's got the first moon that is reacting as well. Io had a super volcanic eruption at its south pole, which, if you scaled Io up to the size of the other planets, would be the largest volcanic eruption in the history of our solar system. I'm sure that is also a coincidence. Uranus is an interesting one. For a while, it was not in this direct evidence category because all it had was record auroras and record storm activity. Two things that you would be expecting if its magnetic field was weakening, right? You would expect more of those auroras and you would expect more record storm activity. But also there was a study that just came out where the James Webb Telescope was able to track clouds, and they were able to, for the first time, perfectly determine the rotation rate of Uranus. And in this explaining how this was so genius, because before this they had been unable to accurately track the rotation rate of Uranus because its magnetic poles are shifting, which made it impossible to do so. And they literally just slipped that in there. There was no paper about this. There was no massive announcement. Just Uranus's poles are shifting, and so we can't tell what's happening there. But it's the indirect evidence where you're going to have to turn your brain on. Let's go to Venus. Venus, major wind anomalies. Major wind anomalies. Its fastest winds are now screaming 33% faster than the first time we looked. On Earth, we're not even at a 3 to 4% increase in wind speed yet. But we do know that wind speed is one of those things that can be affected by this electromagnetic input from the sun, especially if the thing standing in the way, a planet's magnetic and ionic shields, are holding or changing. Mars has more anomalies than Earth does. Climate change on Mars, way more than Earth. There are seismic anomalies on Mars to the point where recently they're noticing that the seismic activity was building and getting bigger and getting bigger and getting bigger beyond what they thought was actually physically possible on the red planet. And now If you look and you look this up, they now believe that Mars' mantle is alive and active, where they thought it was a geologically dead planet forever. And they are trying to explain away how they got this so wrong before, when the answer is probably just that it is just waking back up. There is no contrary evidence to the idea that it was a dead planet, that it was a sleeping interior. But now it is very clear Mars is alive and active. No wonder Elon wants to go there so bad. Saturn's a good one. We actually just got an update on this not too long ago. So we've been able to see Saturn in telescopes for a very long time. And Galileo actually spotted the first superstorm on Saturn. It was in the northern hemisphere. And what they would later realize is this superstorm would happen on the northern hemisphere of Saturn every 30 years on the dot. And then they discovered that this point, which, I mean, for those who don't know, Saturn's orbit is exactly 30 years. This was happening at the moment when Saturn was closest to the sun. It's not a perfect circle, its orbit. And at the point where it's closest to the sun is when this happened. Highest solar energy coming in, and the storm appears. It just happened a decade early. How could this be? For the first time ever, it just shows up a whole decade early? Well, if Saturn's magnetic field is weakening, letting in more solar energy, maybe enough extra solar energy came in to trigger that storm early, whereas normally it would have taken a little longer. Neptune. We had the storm reversal pattern. Just like how on Earth, hurricanes form off the coast of Africa and they charge west towards the Americas. You don't see hurricanes forming off the coast of Myrtle Beach and diving south towards Africa, do you? It's not supposed to physically be able to happen. On Neptune, that just happened. We have been able to notice the storm patterns on Neptune for quite some time, and they just reversed. Which, if you are taking the electromagnetic impact on winds and storms and weather, you start to say, oh, okay. What if that happens on Earth? But most importantly, the aurora are spilling across the equator of Neptune. If you want to take the position, okay, Ben, yes, fine. The sun has that much impact on a planet's atmosphere. You want to claim that Neptune is showing signs of its magnetic field, of its having its own pole flip, which is why the storm's reversed. What else you got? Wouldn't you be expecting to see some other things? Yeah, I would expect a dramatic drop in the planet's temperature, which we've seen on Neptune, and I would expect the aurora to not only be outsized, but I would expect the aurora to not be at the polar regions. I would expecting it to be crossing the equator, which is what James Webb showed just a couple of months ago. And so we have the Earth, and we know that we have this cycle. It's probably not a coincidence that we're perfectly due. It's happening and it's accelerating right now. Those things are probably not coincidence. But then we look at the sun, we look at Jupiter, we look at Uranus. We have direct evidence they're also going through magnetic changes. On Uranus, we happen to know it is an actual shift of the magnetic poles. Venus's wind anomalies. Okay, a lot of things could be the answer, but what also could be the answer is more solar energy getting Mars geo and climate anomalies. Okay, you could, maybe there are aliens geoengineering from the core of Mars. I don't know. I'm not there. It could also be that there's more solar energy entering Mars. Saturn superstorm. Who knows? Maybe Jesus didn't feel like waiting another decade and just tossed the superstorm onto Saturn's northern hemisphere, or maybe it's losing its magnetic field and the requisite amount of solar energy was able to get in earlier than it otherwise would have. Maybe Neptune doesn't follow the same rules of physics and science as everything else in the universe. Or maybe it's got auroras at its equator and its storms are reversing and the planet is plunging into freeze because it's having a magnetic pole shift too. Pluto lost a fifth of its atmosphere in 2019. Why doesn't Mars have an atmosphere? What happens to Earth if we lose our magnetic field? How do you think Pluto lost a fifth of its atmosphere in 1 year? There is either a million different things going on, accounting for all of these things, or there's just one. But again, I'm sorry to be a broken record, maybe that's just a coincidence. If we have the entire solar system being impacted magnetically, and then we would have to also presume that this is not just an Earth cycle, and it's not just a random coincidence that the entire solar system happens to be having a magnetic change that lines up with Earth's cyclical change. This would have to be a cyclical thing happening to the entire solar system. But what could impact the entire solar system magnetically other than the sun? And we know it's not the sun because the sun itself is taking impacts too. The sun is being changed. Well, there is something in our solar system, a spiral, wavy, rippling electric field separating the north and southern magnetic fields of the sun within the solar system, and it's called the heliospheric current sheet. They've reproduced it at a lab. They've seen it at every other star they can study. And
there's also, I think they call it the Grand Central Sun or the Great Central Sun, Alcyon, which is in the part of the Star Wars stories as well.
They've seen it at larger scale too, in the Milky Way and at other galaxies. At that scale, we were going to call this the galactic current sheet. It is a physics law, kind of like this rule. And the reason why it's in the Milky Way, they spotted other galaxies at all the stars, and they can recreate it in the labs because all it takes is a spinning electromagnetic system. In theory, it would start at moment one with a flat plane at the equator. Above it are the northern magnetic fields, below it are the southern magnetic fields. But as the system rotates, it begins to wave and become a rippling, almost like a corrugated look to it. Mathematically, it works. They have modeled it. They have observed it. Those of you who are familiar with the famous Radcliffe wave, sitting just behind our sun from the vantage point of the galactic center, they now believe its sine wave-like form is a function of interacting with this as well. What's really important about that and everything I said, though, is the fact that it is the separation point, the magnetic reversal point of the north and south fields, or in this case, it represents the galactic magnetic reversal point in a ripply, waving sheet form. This, because it's an electric sheet, not only is it carrying with it the delineation point between the north and south magnetic fields, it is acting like an electrostatic Swiffer duster in space. As it is sweeping out from the center, it is picking up gases and dust and particles, and it is bringing those things with it. So we not only have this magnetic environment impact of the galactic magnetic reversal, but we have the galactic material deposition, the tossing of garbage into these solar systems that get hit by this current sheet. And so these take the form mostly of what they call interstellar pickup ions, energetic neutral atoms, or interstellar or galactic dust. Now, the pickup ions and the energetic neutral atoms, those have been steadily on the rise, and we are seeing pressure fronts, pressure shocks, magnetic boundaries in it as Voyager and the New Horizons spacecraft travel outward towards the edge of the solar system. And just on the heels of a study that said we are noticing more dust accumulating at the top of the sun's atmosphere than we expected, New Horizons, flying through the Kuiper Belt way past Pluto, noticed that there's more dust out there than they would have expected too. Where is it coming from? It's coming with the galactic current sheet. And so not only is this probably the only thing that could explain an entire solar system magnetic change, not only do we know that this thing actually exists and it is sweeping through the galaxy, But we look around at the interplanetary space between the planets and we see all the garbage that is being dumped into our system at the exact same time. The reason for Earth's disaster cycle, the reason for these magnetic pole shifts, the reason for this solar system cyclic magnetic shift is our interaction with and taking of the galactic magnetic reversal from the galactic current sheet. And while the impact of this galactic current sheet is this magnetic pole shift or this intrinsic magnetic change of all of the objects that are taking the galactic magnetic reversal, what it does to the sun is most important because it will start to dim. The sun will turn red, and then the sun will turn black as electrical activity on the surface of the sun begins to shut down, and that dust and other material accumulates more and more in the sun's atmosphere. But we don't spend too much time in the reversal state, and then the electrical activity clicks back on as we enter the other half of the galactic magnetic fields, reigniting all of those solar processes and blasting off that outer shell of dust and plasma like a snake violently shedding off its skin. This is the solar micronova, and this is what punctuates, what caps off the zenith of Earth's disaster cycle, at least the beginning of the zenith of Earth's disaster cycle. In terms of the evidence for it, we begin, of course, with the geologic evidence, and this was largely brought to us in the way that we see it now by Doug Vogt. He is the individual, now deceased, may he rest in peace, who went back to all of those 110-year-old.
Yep, go check out Douglas Vogt, VOGT. He's got lectures on YouTube.
Papers in Science, in Nature, and tracked the science up.
It's called the Diehold Foundation.
Through the 30s, 40s, and even 50s, showing that of all of the isotopes and all of the material you find on Earth, there's a couple that really just don't make a lot of sense unless you start thinking in a different way. They are nova-level isotopes with short half-lives. What does that mean? That means that lightning strike, meteor strike, volcano eruption, you're not making this isotope of an atom any way other than a star explosion. You need a nova or you're never getting this isotope. It can't come from anywhere else. The short half-life means if this had happened long, long ago, it would be gone. We wouldn't see it. So this can't be that old. This isotope, which was required to be made in a star explosion, can't be that old. And so when those specific nova isotopes, we're not talking about some of the aluminum isotopes. We're certainly not talking about iron 60 at the bottom of the ocean. That may have been here 50, 60, 80 million years. But when those really short-lived isotopes are preferentially found in the fossil bones, in the petrified wood, in the black glass, that is also in these disaster layers where the magnetite reverses, showing we had the magnetic pole flip, where all the dying takes place, where all the climatological issues take place. The extra fossils, the weird climate stuff, the magnetism changing. That's also the layers where we find those short half-life nova-level isotopes, which basically would suggest that it is part of this cycle as well, which would be one of the only ways you could actually explain all of the ancient stories and even the religious stories fearing the sun, the red sun, the black sun. This doesn't make sense, and we're not going to go for eclipses on this. They specifically talk about what eclipses were, and they could predict eclipses. They weren't afraid of eclipses for the most part. They were terrified of something else from the sun. But when it comes to this really old geologic data where you're looking at microscopic stuff, or you're trying to interpret what was going through the mind of a human, of an early human several thousand years ago, it can only get you so far. So let's come to the present and say, okay, well, could the sun have a micronova? Maybe. Could these isotopes have come from somewhere else, from another star? And this is where mainstream science is still holding strong. This is the hill they're going to die on, because they say this stuff is either left over from when the solar system was created, or it's coming from other stars. Other stars are just going boom.
Really?
And we're taking that material. The problem is some of these isotopes would be gone if they were here from before the solar system was created, right? So that one's off the table. So could it be coming from other stars? They're sending out these blasts. How are they being concentrated in the disaster layers? How would a faraway nova cause a magnetic pole shift? And how would all of these different stars be going off at the right times to make such a perfect cycle here on Earth? And while the light, it gets here, the closest star to us is Proxima Centauri. Light takes 4 years to go back and forth. If Proxima Centauri exploded, it'd be millions of years before the particles got here. So all these stars are going off. Their particles are taking millions of years to get here, somehow not having their half-lives expire, and they're arriving in the exact perfect times as Earth's magnetic pole shift in the disaster cycles. Or the sun is part of it as well, and the sun has a recurrent disaster cycle. Then, of course, we got the magnetic imprisonment of dusty pinballs by a supernova remnant, where they found that the dust to which these isotopes clings can't actually get out of the remnant. Think about all the supernova remnants you've ever seen a picture of. Do they look like they're slowly dissipating into space, or do they look like there's a confined and well-defined shape to them? Those isotopes couldn't have come from another star. They're trapped in the supernova remnant. These isotopes here on Earth, they came from the sun, which should have been obvious given the fact that they're only found in these disaster layers. And that's not possible to happen if it's coming from anywhere else. The timing is too perfect. It would take too long. Magnetically, they can't get out of the supernova remnant anyway. The only answer left is the sun. So how do you create a recurring nova event? Because this would not be a supernova. And I know most people think supernova, death of the star, when they hear the word nova. More than 99% of nova events are not supernova events. Puffs or pops in all directions, like a miniature version. And then they can do it again, a recurrent nova. That's the vast majority of them. And how do they happen? They know two ways. One is a magnetic kick. Some refer to this as the black hole trigger. They are noticing increased nova events on stars that go too close to the galactic center, what they call a supermassive black hole, taking the magnetic kick or magnetic impact from that and triggering a nova event. The much more common, much longer understood, would be accretion, material aggregation. Their favorite version of this is when you have a star that is sucking material off of another star. And it's basically like it's getting peppered and then it sneezes. Might be a good way to put it. Now, what's actually happening is this material is coming, it's blocking energy pathways out, kind of like you put your hand over the vent. Eventually, you're going to get a buildup of pressure underneath that vent kind of thing. But they have seen stars that don't have a degenerate binary. They've seen stars wander into dark, molecular, dusty clouds and start sneezing. And so the vast majority of it is a binary system sucking material. But in general, you have this accretion. If you can dump material onto a star or give it a magnetic kick, there's a good chance it's going to have a nova event. Dump material onto the star or give it a powerful magnetic kick. Like the galactic magnetic reversal, bringing in all of the galactic space garbage. That's both nova mechanisms delivered together at the exact same time in the only way that would actually explain this bigger picture we are talking about right now. I'm not going to say maybe that's a coincidence, because at this point you'd have to be insane to believe that. So let me just go ahead and keep stacking up the things that aren't coincidences, if I may. So there's been a problem with the galactic current sheet in galactic physics. That wavy rippling thing, it's supposed to stop about halfway through. The math says that this wave-like Parker instability should be suppressed. However, they observe it going out past the visible stars. It's not stopped halfway through the galaxy. It goes out past where most visual eyes would say the galaxy stops. And here they finally figured out how. This was at the APS Physics Conference in Pittsburgh, 2021. If you can introduce nova energy directly into this sheet, it can sustain its magnetic buoyancy and the wave can keep going. The only way to fix galactic physics is by having that sheet trigger nova events while it passes. The only way you're going to explain the geologic evidence of where these things came from and how they got in these layers of disaster. The only way you're going to explain why these people who could build pyramids were scared of the sun. Both ways to trigger a nova come at the exact same time via the thing that can explain what's happening throughout the solar system. The only thing that can explain what's happening throughout the solar system, the thing that we know exists, that they've characterized. They know how tall the waves are in the Milky Way. And it just so happens it triggering the solar micronova not only explains the geology, the ancient stories, it not only makes sense with both nova triggers coming at the exact same time from the thing that explains what's happening in the solar system shift, but it's the only thing that fixes galactic physics. I'm sure that's just a coincidence. Now, let's go into some of the dissent and counter arguments to what I've just presented. They say a micronova can only happen on a white dwarf star that is sucking from a degenerate binary. And to that I say, no nova. And I've been saying that for several years. Forget about the fact that micronova were officially discovered in 2022, and now they want to tell us, here are all the rules. When I was being called crazy for talking about micronova in 2019. So let's go back to 2019. There are 10 to 15 major classes and subclasses of nova and supernova events. You can see the list of a bunch of them down below. That's in well over a century of astronomy, built on several centuries of what you'd call uncivilized astronomy. Hundreds of years, we've got 10 to 15 different kinds of nova. Well, we've got about 10 more types now. In 7 years, they've discovered 10 more. And they've discovered 5 other nova events that aren't new classes, but they're on stars that weren't supposed to have them. Or they're in stellar scenarios where they were not supposed to take place, which technically counts as a new kind of nova they haven't seen before. The point I'm making is, every time there's new technology that is released, it is released on the heels of them telling us we have this all figured out. And then some new data comes and it turns out they don't know anything. In 2019, 2020, and 2021, they were saying I was insane. I was a pseudoscientist, fringe lunatic, because micronova weren't a thing. Forget about a solar micronova. Micronova is not even real. He's just making up the word. And here we are, and everybody now knows that they are real things. But beyond that, beyond the fact that they don't know nova, here are the 2 most important updates that we've had in probably a long time, and they both hit right at the end of 2025. Up top, the control of inversion of Earth's magnetic field with Rikitaki's model. Basically, it was saying that the local galactic environment is responsible for Earth's magnetic poles flipping. An external large-scale impact upon the solar system. Which, by the way, would affect more than just the Earth. That would affect all the planets in the way that we are seeing. It would affect the sun in the way we are seeing. This would be the galactic magnetic field and a reversal triggering the magnetic reversal and solar system shift of everything here. December 2025. And while that was coming out down below, one of the first ever theses on micronova, don't forget, they didn't know they existed. Me and the people who watch this channel were the only ones who knew micronova existed for several years until they discovered them in 2022. Here we are at the end of 2025. This is one of the very first ever theses containing the best studied micronova event. By the way, now they know like dozens of them all over. And the conclusion they came to is, oh, wow, these are really hard to see. We've probably missed hundreds of thousands of micronova events over time because they're just so hard to spot. But this best studied one endured a pole shift immediately before its micronova eruption. This is impossible if it is a white dwarf accreting material. Dumping material will not flip its poles. Hitting the galactic magnetic reversal point will. And so we not only have the accretion and the magnetic kick delivered by the galactic current sheet, but we have the overall magnetic environment impacting it, just like it would be in Earth, top paper, the Rikitaki model. And because that is how it works, and because that is going to trigger a pole shift on the sun, then bottom paper, thesis, just like that star, the sun's internal pole shift will occur right before the solar micronova. As time goes on, the coincidences just keep stacking. But what's interesting is what happens next, because this solar energy comes down. It induces all the way to the low velocity zone where the crust meets the mantle, instantly melts that low velocity zone. And all of a sudden, the crust is no longer locked to the mantle. And this is where Euler takes over. Because on any spinning object, if there is a part that weighs more than the other, it will migrate to the equator. It will want to be at the equator as it is spinning. On Earth, that's the North Pole and South Pole ice. And so when Earth's magnetic field collapses, when the solar micronova melts the low velocity zone, and when the crust and mantle are unlocked from one another, the crust begins to shift, bringing those weight inhomogeneities, the heavy points, the ice, to the equator. This is not just a magnetic pole shift, a geologic pole shift, massive flooding. Tsunamis hit every continent. At least half the world is probably going to die in this event. For most of you, the notion that this is beyond a magnetic shift, that the crust is actually going to turn over, is as crazy as a micronova sounded about 25 minutes ago. But we have all the evidence in the world that this is real too. My favorite is Major White, World in Peril, the book by his son, Ken White. For those who don't know, Major Maynard E. White led Project Nanook to the...
I thought he was going to say for a while the white animal showing up, which is also a sign. And is it Migaloo, the white whale? Yeah, I saw him one time as well. But yeah, I just thought he was about to start talking about the white animals and prophecies.
Canadian Arctic. Their goal was to develop bases, learn about navigation, prepare for Arctic battle in case Russia came over the top. Again, this was in the 1940s. And while they were learning to navigate, they had to do a lot of study on Earth's magnetic field, on the magnetic poles, compasses, navigation. And they found that the magnetic pole was moving. And as they dug down, they found that, wait a minute, beneath this layer, there's tropical fossils here. And we dig down and we're finding layer after layer after layer after layer of these cyclical repeating disasters. Major White kept all the classified data from the mission, from the Pentagon, from the Rand Corporation and from the OSS meetings, gave it to his son Ken White to publish in World in Peril. What the government, the Pentagon, their lapdog, the Rand Corporation, and the predecessor to the CIA, the OSS, concluded was that in one day, during the magnetic pole shift, Earth turns over 90 degrees, just as I have described, just as Euler physics describe a rotating body with a weight in homo.
There are different ideas on the degrees that it changes. That is part of the some of the discrepancy. I'll have to refresh on it, but I'm pretty sure some argue that it's 45 degrees, perhaps. It could be that Douglas Vogt is one of those people that says a different amount. Yeah, and then there's another like tick-tocking of 22.5 degrees, but that might be a different story. I've got to refresh on that.
Homogeneity wanting to come from the polar region to the equator. Beyond that, there are trees in Scandinavia, unearthed as a glacier was melting. The forest froze 13,000 years ago. The trees have no tree rings. The only place in the world where trees don't have tree rings is the equator, because tree rings are seasons, the growth and then the hibernation. It doesn't happen in the tropics. The only way you can have Scandinavian trees in northern Norway without any rings is if that area was also at the equator, just like what Major White found with those tropical fossils in the Canadian Arctic. And just think about the mammoths. We've heard about the mammoths, frozen so fast the food was left undigested in their mouths and stomachs. And we all ask the question, how do you freeze a mammoth so quickly? But I also ask, what were they eating? Because they had to dig them out of 20, 30 feet of snow, ice up in the Arctic. Today, there's nothing growing there. But these animals froze in the glacial period. 10, 20 degrees colder. And you're going to tell me those things were up at the polar region eating 1,000 pounds of vegetation a day? There's nothing growing there now. They had to dig them out of 20 feet of ice. What do you think was there for them to eat when it was 10, 20 degrees colder? Unless it wasn't at the polar region, unless the planet was like this. The mammoths were eating at a comfortable latitude, and then they found themselves instantly freezing at the polar region. Outside of that, the mammoths couldn't have been there. What were they doing there? What were they eating? You could never find mammoths that were frozen in the glacial period in the polar region if that area had not been closer to the tropics before. We have the stories of the sun rising in the wrong place. We have the stories of the long night, where night seemed to last a full day and the tribe didn't think it was ever coming back. They thought they were all going to freeze to death. All of these stories begin to actually make sense when you realize what Einstein realized. This is Einstein's foreword in Charles Hapgood's book. Einstein was 100% convinced that the Earth turns over. He just couldn't figure out how to make it work. The evidence was there, and it's convinced him, it convinced Hapgood, Walker, Cuvier, Deluc, even Newton. The evidence is quite clear about what the Earth does and how the Earth does it. And so after Earth tilts, this is what we are going to look like. This is if you take the Euler physics and you take the ice and you move it to the equatorial region. And it just so happens that where the magnetic poles are moving right now would end up in the new geologic north and south poles when the Earth tilts exactly like this. Here it is with both the flat and the tilted view, by the way. Now, some of you are going to be saying things like, wait a minute, isn't there published evidence that Earth has never tilted like that, that we haven't had a crustal shift? And they will mostly point to this article, one of the most cited over 500 times. And it indeed shows There was no tilt to Earth at any point. But what does it say in orange? There's a correction for this article. That one hasn't been cited 10 times, but it shows some of the pole positions on the exact opposite of the planet that they were initially reported, basically showing. So if you go and you actually read the correction article and you see how it corrects the latitude and longitude, it in fact says Earth flips periodically. And yet the entire world goes with the previous, now corrected. This erroneous article is the one cited 500 times. This is why the scientists will tell you the Earth can't do it. But if they actually include the corrected data, it says the Earth tilts. Many such examples. What about the super old ice? They say that super old ice that's 2 million years old in Antarctica or wherever, poppycock, complete hogwash. First of all, we're going with that same isotope dating that has all the problems. And all you have to do is take a look at what happened in the Tibetan Plateau. The same ice that they thought was over 500,000 years old, more than 500,000 years old. They throw some krypton dating at it, and maximum age, 17,000. There's another example of this where they were dating a crater created by a meteor in Australia. They at first thought it was over 300,000 years old. Now they're saying this is less than 200,000 years old. Isotope dating is a complete disaster. So right off the bat, I don't want to hear anything about 2 million year old ice. You don't know what you're doing. None of these people have any, unless the ice was dated with krypton, they should literally throw the results in the trash. But beyond that, we still have tropical glaciers today in Africa, in South America, and in Southeast Asia. There are still glaciers in the tropics today, 12,000 years into a hot interglacial period. I don't think if you put Antarctica or Greenland at the equator for 12,000 years in a glacial period, they're going to melt. Not if we still have glaciers in the tropics today and it's a hot period. We're not in a glacial period. This is a hot period. There's still glaciers in the tropics today. You think Antarctica or Greenland are going to melt off in a glacial period when it's 20 degrees colder? I don't think so, and I don't believe your isotope dating anyway. Kind of an interesting and important chart. The fact that there is a disaster cycle. The fact that it is due now. The fact that it is happening now. All that stuff is 99%. The fact that it is an extinction risk with these recent papers, I would say everybody should consider that one over 90%. Maybe even up towards the 99% range. The exact timing, as I have presented it, being due in the 2040s, I'd say put that one around 90%. Same with the galactic trigger. Too many coincidences. I mean, unless you think that we literally stacked 9 or 10 unrelated coincidences on top of one another, and that's all they are, is unrelated coincidences. Yeah. It's this galactic trigger. It's the galactic magnetic reversal. The fact that it's a solar micronova versus like a super flare, 70, 80%. And then as you go down with the Earth turning over, the tilt angle that I suggest, the tilt angle of some of the other individuals in this space, for example, Roger Cunningham, known as the ethical skeptic. He also believes there's going to be an approximately 90-degree tilt. I think he says it's a little off from 90 degrees, but essentially it's basically like a half turn or a quarter turn, depending on how you think of it. And instead of the new north and south poles in my model being the Bay of Bengal and near South America, he thinks the new polar region are going to be Africa and somewhere in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. All of that stuff, as you see, we come down there, the percentage of certainty gets down, but it's also not as important as you get down there, is it? Because the fact that we have this disaster cycle, we're due in time, it's happening right now, it's speeding up, and this is an extinction level event, should be all anyone needs to really begin to care about what's happening at the moment.
My name is Zach Voorhees. I'm known as the Google whistleblower, and I had an inside view of how they did their censorship within Google. And I know the program, That program was called Machine Learning Fairness. And it was that program that led me here to Observer Ranch today. You know, when I was a kid, I noticed that the sun, I remember, used to be a lot more yellow. And I thought that as I got older that it was maybe my vision that was changing or something like that. But the sun sort of looks a little bit more whiter right now. But when Ben mentioned that the sun had used to be more yellow, I went, I remember that. And so I went on the internet and I tried to find, well, are other people noticing that the sun is getting more white? And sure enough, there's a whole bunch of people that are noticing the exact same thing.
That tiny little bit of light that is increasing here on Earth as the magnetic field weakens. Yes, it's mostly particles intruding more, but I said there was a small change in the light, and it's a broader spectrum of the light that is being let in. The more of the light spectrum you see, the whiter the light looks. And this is why the sun used to be yellow, but it's more white now. And it will go to red and then black and then have the solar micronova. But what's interesting is this matches the four horsemen of the apocalypse. The first horseman is white, wears a crown on his head. And the sun is so bright up at the top of the sky, its rays look like a crown. Who's coming next? The red horseman, stealing the civility of the people. I assure you, when the sun turns red, there will be no civility left on this planet. Black. Black is the next horseman. He carries the scales of justice. It's going to feel like we're all being judged when we see a black star moving across the sky. And what is the final one? A pale horse. And its name, it says on it, is death. And hell follows with him. And through the nova dust and the plasma, we will once again see those pale hues of the familiar sun. But hell is coming with it. It's quite the coincidence, isn't it? Let's take a look at the Apollo mission badge. That's a bunch of horses. Why is the sun so prominent in the Apollo moon mission? And what does Apollo have to do with the moon? Wasn't Apollo a sun god? You know, it's interesting. If this galactic current sheet is instigating solar blasts as it's coming, okay, maybe we can't see too far back in the past, but we should be able to look at the stars that are right in between us and the galactic center and see, okay, are they popping one after another? And turns out they are. Turns out they absolutely are. Barnard Star, Proxima Centauri, AD Leonis. They're going off one by one, and not on this graphic actually from our 2021 book, but there's a Gliese star that they just discovered even closer to the galactic center. It's the next one in line, and it went pop before Barnard did. The sun is next in line. They are popping. Now, because these are small red dwarfs, it is taking the super flare route more than a micronova route, but it is still these high-level instigations by the galactic current sheet. And yes, we can track this. It won't tell us the year that the sun is going to go, but it can tell us that, yes, everything that we've been expecting to see, we are seeing. And that includes the stars going boom directly in a line from the galactic center towards the sun, and we are next in line. You know, I can't help but think to myself, as I want a last word for you guys on this, that whether it's the pyramids or it's Derinkuyu, Cappadocia in Turkey, or it's something like the Texas rock wall, which is now buried, there is evidence of ancient cultures attempting to save themselves, attempting to hide from the sky, attempting to prepare for disaster. I think it's pretty obvious that the governments are doing this. The elites are as well. Elon Musk, he's got the Boring Company and SpaceX. He can go up or down. But Jeff Bezos can too. He's hollowing out a mountain across the street from one of the Blue Origin launch facilities. I have heard rumors that some of the remaining near space-worthy craft that Richard Branson have buried beneath there is his bunker. Mark Zuckerberg. Well, I don't think somebody told him the whole story. I wouldn't have built where he's building, but the point is, this does happen every 6,000 years. We are here talking about it on the internet. This should comfort you. But it will require awareness, preparation, and maybe a little luck. The one thing I can say is that doing nothing is not an option. Going back to focusing on life or social media or your job or whatever will not stop this from coming for you and your children. It's already on the doorstep. You may want to think about preparing.
You do have a bunker there. Is there something you know that we don't?
No, I think that's just like a little shelter under, and it's like a basement.
Little shelter. What are you worried about?
But Elon Musk says a couple things within just a few minutes. He says, if you want to go down a deep, deep rabbit hole, look into ice ages and how often they happen. He goes on to say that
let's listen to this.
Okay.
Listen to
if you read about ice ages.
Yeah. Really? Like
Yeah,
what?
deep rabbit hole on ice ages.
What's so intriguing about them? The whole Earth has just been through the whole Earth is just freezing.
Like I said, there's deep rabbit hole on ice ages. Deep rabbit hole.
So interesting. That's
that how much Earth's climate has changed, and even where the magnetically where the poles are has shifted over time.
He knows.
Realistically, it's the end of the world for most of us. I mean, all these people on the beach, all these people in the cities, they'll be gone. I sometimes wonder if this entire thrust of my work was to be able to enable me to see that. Because if I hadn't learned all the things I've learned over the past 15, 20 years, and longevity and solar physics and stuff, I might not have ever been ready for this. I would have missed it, so to speak. I mean, it's terrible to think about it, but I expect to die. You know, that's the odds are I will. And if I don't, that's a great bonus. But I'm going to make every effort to make sure that I'm healthy enough to survive it, because I want to see it. I know it sounds crazy, but I want to live long enough to see the end of the world.
There you have it, guys. And again, just to reiterate, my intention here is to arm ourselves with the true information for worldview healing. It's only then, once we have the ability to, come to stepwise kind of foundations on this disaster cycle and cataclysm, that we can take appropriate actions. So I do think that Mark Passio says this all the time, and not just to reiterate what he says all the time, but he's right on a lot of stuff. So, this program of passivity, this kind of like, fight or flight or stagnation around this particular issue. I think that's going to shift. I think that part of it is the ability to come to coherence around what it really means that this is going on in our lifetime. So do your own research, and until next time, I'll see you. I'm Nick Haslam, and this is Cosmic Surfers. Ciao for now. Bye-bye.